Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for this Residential Energy Consumption Survey webinar. We're going to go ahead and get started now. My name is Maggie Woodward, and I work as an industry economist on the Building Survey Statistics team in EIA's Office of Energy Statistics, the office that houses EIA's energy consumption surveys. Joining me today are Chip Berry, the survey manager for the RECS, and Danny Macklin, a survey statistician who works on both the RECS and its sister survey of commercial buildings, the CBECS. This presentation will last about 40 minutes, and then we're going to open up to questions. Today, we're going to discuss the first data to be released from the 2015 RECS, which are the housing characteristics data. The RECS has a broad audience, and our participants today are pretty diverse. After this webinar, we hope that you'll know how to access RECS data, some trends in energy use in the home, and features that made the 2015 RECS unique. First, I'm going to give an overview of the data release schedule and show you the resources that are available on our website. Then, Chip is going to talk about some interesting highlights from the 2015 RECS. Next, Danny will give you an overview of the methodology that we used for the 2015 RECS, including notable ways that this round differed from previous RECS. After that, we'll have some discussion from Chip about what the future of the RECS might look like. Finally, we'll take time to answer some of your questions. Throughout the presentation, please feel free to use the chat feature of this WebEx session to submit questions you have for our presenters. So let's take a quick look at the release schedule for the 2015 data. Already available for you are the housing characteristics data. The data tables were published back in February, and more recently, we've made a public use microdata file available, along with a methodology report and an overview report called What's New in Home Energy Use? Soon, we'll be putting out the square footage data. At that point, we'll add more data tables with measures of total and average square footage, and we'll update the microdata file with the square footage variables associated with each housing unit. In 2018, we'll publish the estimates of energy consumption and expenditures. As you may know, the RECS happens in two phases: the household survey, which collects information on the structure and contents of homes, and the energy-using behaviors of their occupants, and the energy supplier survey, which collects billing information from the energy suppliers of the households that completed the household survey. Those data are then combined in engineering-based statistical models, which is the phase of production that we're currently in. We expect the final data to be ready in spring of 2018. So now I'm going to take you out to our website to show you where you can find all of this data. This is the homepage for the RECS on EIA.gov. You'll see a lot of our recent analyses up here in the carousel or down here lower in the features section. To get to the data, you can go to this data tab at the top of the page. There are a few ways to navigate between the different years of data. You'll see that there's a drop-down menu here, or once you go to the data page, which is being very slow to open.
Try a different browser.
Apologies, folks.
There we go.
So, or when you get to this data page, you can see that there are links to the different survey years here across the top. Right now, we have 9 sets of tables available: fuels used and end uses, structural and geographic characteristics, appliances, electronics, lighting, space heating, air conditioning, water heating, and household demographics. We tabulate the data by many characteristics for each of these topics. To see the tables, you just click the heading to expand it, and you'll see each table is available in an HTML format if you click the name of the title, or you can download it as an Excel file. I want to note that the Excel files have the data as well as the corresponding measures for each estimate, error measures for each estimate, which will help you assess the reliability of the estimates. If you're interested in working with our microdata, you'll find some additional guidance on the microdata tab up here. The microdata file contains the individual responses from each household that participated in the RECS. You can use it to make your own estimates for topics that we don't include in our tables or to conduct further analyses. We make the microdata available in a CSV format as well as a SAS file. We have a really handy PDF that gives a few examples on how to create estimates using both Excel and SAS. I'd really recommend this as a resource if you're interested in getting started working with the microdata. Two other items that you'll find helpful are the codebook and the survey forms. The codebook is in Excel, and it gives the name, the variable type, the description, and the response codes for all the variables that are available to you. If you want to see exactly how a question was presented to the respondents, you can access the survey forms themselves by following this link. I'm not going to dive into those today. Finally, let's take a quick look at the methodology tab. Here you can find the summary document that we've put out so far for the data that are currently available. We'll add to this page as we release more data from the 2015 RECS. That about covers it for our website, so I'm going to turn things over to Chip to tell you more about our findings from the 2015 RECS.
Okay, thank you very much, Maggie. As many of you know, my name is Chip Berry, and I'm the project manager for the RECS. And before I get into talking about some highlights from the first part of the 2015 RECS, I just want to say thanks for everyone who's shown interest in the webinar. We had well over 200 people register, and many of you I've emailed with or talked to on the phone or even met in person. So it's good to have so many people in at least the same virtual room together to talk about RECS. And I will say that we have a pretty broad, diverse audience with different levels of expertise here. We hope that all of you get something out of this webinar, and I want to say that we'll have more of these in the future as we continue to release RECS data, and perhaps more importantly, as we ramp up for the next RECS, which is looking to be about a 2020 RECS with some possible significant changes. So this is our way of beginning more communication with our data user community and more interaction with data users. So thanks for attending. Okay, so the 2015 RECS characteristics data set contains about 250 variables that, when taken together, describe how U.S. households use energy in their homes. Most of the topics we cover have been carried over from prior rounds of RECS, which allow us to show trends in the data over several decades, and I'll show some of those today. For each RECS, though, we add or revise questions as new technologies are introduced into homes. For the 2015, we added, among other items, questions about smart thermostats and smart meters, LED lights, and programmable thermostat usage. We also revised our appliance usage questions to capture more detail on average usage per week. In addition to national trends over time and penetration of new devices, a key feature of RECS is that we allow comparisons across a number of subpopulations within the residential sector. This includes geography, housing type, age of home, income, among other characteristics. All right, now let's look at some key findings from the first phase of the 2015 RECS. And you can find a lot of these highlights in EIA's Today in Energy articles. We also have a summary overview document of the characteristics. And I also want to mention a recent social media campaign that features some infographics. If you're on Twitter, you can search for hashtag EIA_RECS. And you can retweet all our stuff there. Okay, so we've organized these highlights much like we organize a survey for the respondents. So we'll start with some structural features outside the home, then work our way around the inside of a typical home from the kitchen to the basement. The first graph compares older and newer homes on two particular structural characteristics. First is ceiling height, which is shown in green, and window type, which is shown in blue. Here you see that newer homes are more likely to have efficient windows, which decrease heating and cooling loads in general. But newer homes are also more likely to have high ceilings, which can increase space conditioning intensity. This is this first chart's a really good example of a general storyline about residential consumption over the past 35 to 40 years, and that's more efficient features like double pane windows being somewhat offset by features that put upward pressure on home energy consumption, like really high ceilings. And that same storyline kind of holds true with refrigerators. On the one hand, refrigerators are much, much more efficient than they were even 15, 20 years ago. But RECS data, like you see here on this chart, clearly show that more homes now have second refrigerators, and more homes have even third refrigerators. This chart here shows that in 2015, 30% of homes had at least a second or third refrigerator. And of course, those second and third refrigerators are older on average than the main ones. Okay, we'll stick with appliances. And we collect detailed information on all common appliances found in kitchens and laundry rooms. As I mentioned earlier, we collect detailed usage information in addition to ages and types of appliances. For the 2015 RECS, we revised our usage question to capture major appliances that households have but do not use. We found that the most unused major appliance is the dishwasher. And that's represented here in that brownish tan color on the far left bar. And it shows that almost 13% of households have but don't use a dishwasher. For other common appliances like clothes dryers and microwaves, almost all households use the device if they have it. Now, what we didn't capture was the reasons why some households don't use their dishwasher, but that could range from broken equipment to simply a preference for hand-washing dishes. And one anecdote I'll give you is growing up, I'd say for about 10 years in my household, we had a dishwasher that was broken that my parents refused to get fixed, and the reason my dad gave me was, why do we need to fix our dishwasher? That's why we have you and your sister. Okay, next highlight. After we asked respondents about kitchen and laundry appliances, we moved to the living room and are asking an ever-increasing number of questions about electronics. There were 25 electronics questions in the 2015 RECS survey. By comparison, in the 1990 RECS, we had 2 questions about TVs and 1 question about computers. In fact, the 1990 RECS survey asked more questions about waterbeds than about computers. Since that time, there's been an ever-increasing number of entertainment and information devices in homes. But a key finding, which is highlighted in this graph from the 2015 RECS, suggests a new possible trend. In the Today in Energy article we released several months ago when we first released the tables, we highlighted the increase in the homes with no TVs, which doubled from 1.3% in 2009 to 2.6% in 2015. This change is shown in the smallest red bars for each survey year. We also found a decrease in homes with 3 or more TVs, which is shown in the darker blue bars. We also have additional detail about devices that are replacing and supplementing traditional TV watching like laptops, tablets, and smartphones. You'll find those in our data tables in the microdata file. Space heating is perhaps the most comprehensive section of the questionnaire, and that's not surprising, considering space heating, this end use counts for about 40% of residential site consumption. In this graph on the left, you see that furnaces remain the most popular choice for main heating equipment, and natural gas is still the most popular fuel. In the graph on the right, you see that many homes also supplement their heating with things like portable electric heaters, fireplaces, or wood-burning stoves. And if you step back and take a broad view, you see that these graphs convey the variability in heating choices across the country and the value of collecting these data via the RECS. The differences in heating choices from one area of the country to another is obvious, but you can see that heating preferences can vary considerably from one neighbor to another. So we had 5,687 household respondents for the 2015 RECS, and you'll see that in each of those responses in the microdata file. And out of those 5,687 cases, we had 150 unique combinations of primary and secondary fuels and devices used for heating. And you can see that this contributes to the length of the survey questionnaire and the complexity in disaggregating energy end uses. All right, now let's move to air conditioning or space cooling. 87% of homes now use either central AC or individual window wall units, or both. And although central AC systems have become the norm in just about every area of the country, air conditioning use too can also be pretty diverse. How households actually use those whole home AC systems can vary considerably. In the 2015 RECS, we asked a new question of respondents about how they interact with thermostats to control their central AC. As shown in green on the top of this graph, we found that just 18% of those with central AC use the programmable features of the thermostat. The most common method of controlling temperature was just to set one temperature and forget it, which is shown in the blue bar. On the bottom graph, for those with individual window wall units, the most common method for controlling the temperature was just to turn the unit on or off as needed. The next slide highlights the revised series of questions on lighting. And it's a little bit surprising that questions about LED lights was a new question for the 2015 RECS. The penetration of LED lights in homes is a fairly recent phenomenon, and when we conducted the 2009 RECS, most respondents would not have been able to recognize this technology. What we found with the 2015 RECS is that households are using a mix of bulb types, with less than a quarter of households going all in on one type. Just 1% of our respondents said they used all LEDs, 10% said they used all CFLs, and 11% said they still just use all incandescents. All right, so the final graph I have for you today shows that most homes still rely on a mix of energy sources or fuels to meet the energy needs in their homes. In 2015, 66% of homes used electricity and one or other fuel, and 10% used electricity and at least two other fuels. This left just 25% of homes that only relied on electricity. This percentage of all electric homes, however, was up from 16% in 1993, and this trend is driven by the increasing prevalence of all electric homes in the South. Okay, so these are just a few of highlights from the 2015 RECS characteristics data. There are, of course, many more that you can find in the standard data tables and the microdata, and again, I'll mention the Today in Energy articles and the infographs that are out there. And now I'll turn it over to Danny Macklin, who's going to explain a little bit more about how we get these results.
Thanks, Chip. Now I'm going to share some important information about how we conducted the 2015 RECS. This includes many highlights from the methodology documentation Maggie pointed out earlier on the RECS website. As an overview, I'm going to talk about 6 key areas. Sampling, which includes how we selected that sample of households and what it represents. Questionnaire design, which includes the topical areas and format. The modes of data collection used for the 2015 RECS, as well as differences between the in-person, web, and mail versions of the questionnaire. The response rate for the 2015 RECS, as well as some data quality analysis we performed. The processing and editing of the data we did after it's collected. And finally, 2 important statistical steps performed before we release any data. Imputation is when we fill in missing values so that we have a complete data set. And weighting is when we assign a numerical weight to each responding household so that the final RECS data set represents all U.S. homes. Let me tell you a little bit more about the sample. The sample design and selection are important to ensure that the 5,000 or so households we interviewed are able to represent all 118.2 million homes in the U.S. All occupied primary residences in the 50 states and the District of Columbia were eligible for selection. This includes single-family homes, mobile homes, and apartment units. However, we exclude vacant, seasonal, and vacation homes, as well as group quarters, like prisons or dormitories. Our sample is designed to make national estimates, as well as estimates for the 4 census regions and 10 census divisions. We did this by having multiple stages of selection to ensure we had enough sample in each geographic area. The graphic on the right of this slide gives an overview of these 3 stages of selection. The first stage divided the nation into public use microdata areas, which are also referred to as PUMAs. PUMAs are designated by the U.S. Census Bureau. These could be counties, cities, or other large areas. We selected 200 PUMAs. The second stage divided the selected PUMAs into census block groups, also called CBGs, A census block group might be a neighborhood or small town. 4 CBGs per PUMA were selected, for a total of 800. The third stage involved randomly selecting housing units within the sampled CBGs. A list of residential addresses was obtained from the U.S. Postal Service, and this was supplemented with in-person field listing, particularly in rural areas. And a total of 12,753 housing units were selected to participate for the 2015 RECS. At the same time we were preparing the sample, we were also developing the questionnaire and materials used for the 2015 RECS. We started with a review of the 2009 questionnaire, identifying items to add and drop to keep up with current household technologies. We also solicited suggestions from data users. And then before we determined the final questionnaire wording, we pre-tested most of the new or substantially changed questions. And Chip already told you about some of the new questions we added for 2015, such as those covering LED light bulbs, smartphones, and tablets. Households selected to participate in the 2015 RECS completed either an in-person, web, or mail questionnaire. We've been using the in-person, computer-assisted personal interview since the 1997 RECS. Trained interviewers visit each selected home and complete the interview on a laptop. The interview software includes skip patterns and real-time edit checks. But new for 2015 were the offering of web and mail questionnaires to some selected households. We started testing these new modes in 2014 through a series of pilots that I'll tell you a bit more about in a few minutes. And here we have a list of the topics covered by the RECS household questionnaire. With the exception of the last 2 sections, all of these topics were covered in the in-person, web, and mail questionnaires. But the web and mail questionnaires were a little bit shorter, so they took less time to complete. For example, in the appliances section, all questionnaires collected the total number of refrigerators in each home, followed by detail about up to 2 refrigerators, including the size, age, and door arrangement of each. And then for the in-person questionnaire, we also collected the same detail about the 3rd refrigerator for the approximately 5% of households with 3 or more refrigerators. Published estimates in our data tables and the variables in the microdata file only reflect the items that we collected for all 3 modes. And I want to call your attention to a few sections. The energy supplier section collects the name of a household's utility or bulk fuel delivery company, and that's who we contact in our follow-up energy supplier survey. And during the in-person interviews, we also ask for sample energy bills, which the interviewer scans at the end of the interview. And then finally, as the size of a housing unit is very important to understanding its energy use, our interviewers are trained to measure each home in a standard way based on its shape and number of levels. And then we use the collected measurements to calculate total heated and cooled square footage values for each home. But in contrast, we weren't able to measure the homes that responded by web or mail, so we had to impute the size of the home instead. And these square footage data haven't been released yet, but they'll be coming out this fall. So let me give you an example of how the same question looked on our 3 different questionnaires, starting with the in-person interview. As the interviewers use a specialized software, the box on the left is from our Microsoft Word specification. The name of this variable is dishwash, as indicated at the top. For those who want to compare RECS data across survey cycles, we note that the question changed from the 2009 version. The question wording and response options are listed, as well as the 1 and 0, which indicate the values on the public microdata file. The software automatically follows the skip logic at the bottom. If you report having a dishwasher, you next receive a question about how often it's used. And if not, you're skipped to the next topic. There's 1 question per screen, and the entire in-person questionnaire specification is posted on the RECS website if you want to reference it. It's about 200 pages long. The image on the right is clipped from the mail questionnaire. While the question wording for the dishwasher question is the same, visual cues are used to help respondents navigate, and instructions are provided if necessary. The small 1 and 0 next to the yes and no were used by staff who keyed the data from submitted questionnaires. The mail questionnaire is also posted on the RECS website, and it's a 20-page booklet. Next, we have a web screenshot of the same question. Again, one question is displayed per screen. This ensures respondents do not accidentally skip a question and is also more mobile friendly. The respondent selected a radio button, then clicked next to move on to the next question, which, like the in-person survey, depended on their response. Each screen had the same look and feel, including RECS, DOE, and EIA branding, as well as a progress bar in the top right in blue. So before we decided to use these new web and mail questionnaires as part of the 2015 RECS, we did a number of pilot tests. This ensured we were confident that these new modes would work and the data would be comparable to the in-person interviews we've been using for a long time. The pilot tests were iterative, so we incorporated results and lessons learned from each pilot in the design of the next version. The first pilot in 2014 was run in cooperation with the University of Maryland Survey Methodology Program. The second cities pilot was in early 2015. And then the third national pilot occurred while the interviewers were starting the 2015 RECS data collection. From all these pilots, we learned that the web and mail modes are significantly quicker and cheaper than in-person interviews, while still collecting high-quality data. Including these new modes as part of the 2015 RECS allowed us to collect household data more efficiently. At the end of today's webinar, Chip will talk a bit more about how using web and mail might transform the future of the RECS program. In total, 5,686 households responded to the 2015 RECS, yielding a response rate of 51%. In contrast, the response rate for 2009 was 79%. This is in keeping with the general trend of falling response rates to surveys and polls, but as it was so much lower, it led us to perform an in-depth data quality analysis. We tried to be comprehensive by performing multiple types of analysis. First, we compared 2015 RECS results against those from previous RECS and other benchmark surveys, such as the American Community Survey. We next compared participation of different subgroups within the RECS sample, such as by housing unit type, geography, and household income. We also assessed the likelihood of non-response bias, which occurs when people who choose to respond to a survey are significantly different than people who do not respond to a survey. For example, we'd have a problem if the only people that responded to RECS were those that cared about energy efficiency. That would lead us to overestimate things like LED light bulbs or Energy Star appliances. Finally, we compared the responses from the three questionnaire modes against each other. To summarize the results of our data quality analysis, we found very few variables with significant differences and concluded most were not practically different. We also found little indication of non-response bias. And while we did observe some demographic differences between the response modes, for example, web respondents are likely to have higher income and education level, we did not find many energy differences. So the heating and fuel and equipment distribution looked very similar across all the modes. After the data was collected, there was plenty of work to do. The in-person and web data were already in electronic formats, but the mail questionnaires still had to be keyed. To reduce keying errors, 2 people keyed each questionnaire, and then any differences were reviewed and resolved. All completed interviews went through a validation process to ensure that the correct households were interviewed and key questions were answered. And all interviewer and respondent comments were reviewed for indications of data quality issues. The data were also thoroughly reviewed for outliers, inconsistent values, and write-in responses. If this review indicated that a response was incorrect, it was either changed to a different response using deductive reasoning or filled in through imputation, which I'll explain more about in a second. After the editing process was complete, data from all 3 modes were combined into one analysis file. And then we added some auxiliary geographic and weather information for each household. Finally, I want to tell you about two statistical processes that are important in producing a complete data set for both internal and public use. After editing, we fill in any remaining missing values in the data set, which is also known as imputation. About 200 variables from the 2015 RECS were imputed. We generally don't have too much missing data, so on average, we only imputed about 4% of values. There are many possible imputation methods, but we used hot deck imputation because it can take the relationship between multiple variables in the data set into account. In this method, we match a recipient household, which is the one with a missing value, to a similar donor household, and then we borrow its value. For example, if a respondent in New England that uses a boiler for space heating did not know the fuel it used, we would identify all the other households in New England with a boiler that did know their heating fuel. That would be our donor pool, and then one of those would be randomly selected as the donor, and the recipient would be assigned its response for main heating fuel, which might be natural gas or fuel oil. After imputation, we calculate an analysis weight for each household. These weights allow us to use the data from the responding RECS households to make population-level estimates, as shown in our data table. The sum of all the weights is 118.2 million, which equals the total number of U.S. homes based on the 2015 American Community Survey, which is conducted by the Census Bureau. The weight for every household is a little bit different, but the average weight is about 20,000. This means that on average, one responding RECS household represents itself and about 19,999 other households like it. Maggie mentioned the great documentation about using the public microdata file. The important thing is that the weight variable is called N-weight. And feel free to reach out if you have any questions about using the weights in your own analysis. So now I'll hand things back to Chip to tell you a little bit more about our plans for the future.
Okay, thank you very much, Danny. And as Danny mentioned, we use web and paper surveys extensively for the 2015 RECS household survey phase. And this was the first time in the history of the program that we used these modes extensively for collection. And this was actually not planned, not what we had planned for the 2015 RECS. Our original plan was to only test these new modes, see how they performed, and potentially integrate them into the future RECS program. But we had 3 rounds of tests of web and paper that were so promising that we decided to use them to complete this round of RECS. So the fact that we already published or have already used web and paper gives us great confidence that we can expand the usefulness of RECS beginning with the next round. There's a lot of cost efficiency built in when you don't have to train and travel an army of interviewers. And over the next several months, we will begin to explore options which could include expanding the sample size to cover estimates for all 50 states, more frequent data collections, or collecting data from a panel of respondents over several years, so a longitudinal component to the survey. Now, by bringing the per unit cost of the household survey down, it also allows us to explore innovative data collection methods, like installing sub-metering devices in a sample of homes that produce estimates of consumption more directly. We can also look at data gaps, like multifamily energy consumption in multifamily buildings and mixed-use buildings. So we have a number of options for the next RECS, and our plan right now is, as I mentioned earlier, is for a 2020 RECS. As we did prior to the 2015 RECS, we'll have a series of meetings with stakeholders and data users, such as yourself, as we ramp up to the next RECS. So in addition to our discussion of the 2015 data and methods, feel free to begin asking questions, as some of you already have, or make comments today about the next RECS. So with the time we have left, looks like I mentioned we already have lots of questions, so I'll turn it back over to Maggie, who's going to work us through some Q&A, and hopefully have some answers for you.
Wonderful. Now we'd like to open the floor to your questions. As a reminder, you can submit questions through the chat feature of WebEx, and then we're going to respond to them aloud now. A couple people have asked already if there are going to be, if there's going to be a recording of this presentation or the slides available, and I'll just say yes. We will be putting up a recording, a transcript, and the slides for you. Give us a couple days just to get it all converted and ready. But yes, that will be available through a link from our RECS homepage. So Second, we have had some folks ask questions about the sample size versus the response rate. Folks noted that there were 12,000 homes, a little more than, samples for the RECS this year, but the microdata file only contains 5,686 responses. Chip or Danny, would you like to address that?
Sure, I'll take that one, Danny. So, and there might be a little bit of confusion because the 2009 RECS we had over 12,000 cases, so those numbers are kind of the same. So I'll start with the 2015 RECS first of all. So when we mention a sample size of 12,000, that means that's the original selection of addresses or households that were included in the 2015 RECS sample. Out of that of roughly 12,000, we had 5,686 actually respond. So that's that. There's a difference between the sample and the original sample and the responding sample. I also see a question about why the decreased number of completes between the 2009 and the 2015, and that's for a couple of reasons. The primary reason is it's resource-based, so we had more resources in 2009 to do a larger sample, and those resources were not quite available for the 2015 survey. But another reason, too, is that, and this goes to the web, use of the web and paper. If you'll notice, if you know any history about the RECS, that it started off as an annual survey, and it became biennial, and then triennial, and then quadrennial, and then there's a 6-year gap between the 2009 and 2015, and that sort of was a big hint to us that we need to look at reducing the cost, the per complete cost of the survey if we want to make this continue to make this a sustainable program. So we decided to devote some resources to testing web and mail for the 2015 RECS. And that's a little bit of a risk because you don't know if it's going to work, but it's worked. That's obvious because we actually use those modes, and we plan to use them in the future. So hopefully that answers the question about the difference in the sample sizes and the numbers we're throwing out there.
Great. So another question we got was, were there any rewards or incentives for completing the survey?
Yeah, Danny, you want to take that one?
Sure. Yes, we did offer incentives to our respondents from all the different modes, and we view it as a token of appreciation for their time. It's not like we are paying people for their response. And so I think, for example, for the in-person, the interviewer, was it $10 that they offered unconditionally to the respondents when they visited them?
Yes.
So, yeah.
Thanks, Danny. So we got another question about, questions. Who determines changes that are made in the questionnaire? Is that something EIA does? Is this something we seek government-wide input on?
Okay, another good question. So questions are revised from one RECS to another based on, I mentioned new technology, that's an obvious one. But we also revise questions to improve poor performing questions, and also adding and deleting questions, or mostly adding questions that will benefit our in-use model, our in-use models. But as far as how users can solicit input for changes in the questionnaire, for 2009 and 2015, we conducted a number of data user workshops to talk about those ideas. There's also informal input that we get from time to time. My email is all over the RECS website. You're free to solicit input however you want to. And the most formal process before we go out with each RECS, there's something called the Federal Register Notice. And that's open to the public, and anyone can write in any comments about a pending RECS survey. So I mentioned the user input workshops, and those will definitely be ramping up as we get closer to the 2020 RECS.
So we have a question, can the RECS be linked to ACS for more geographic granularity?
Yeah, that's a tough one. With the sample size of about 5,700 or so, we don't have state level data, much less anything down to like the county level. And so linking with ACS, we don't make addresses available as part of the microdata, so linking is kind of hard there. There's potentially other analysis that could be done using the granularity within ACS. And that's generally on a case-by-case basis. And if you're interested in doing that kind of work, you could contact me directly, and I can give you some feedback in that area.
Cool. Chip, we have a question about the graph that you had showing different ways of controlling air conditioning, focusing on like the set it and forget it thermostats. Someone asked, was that for cooling only or for cooling and heating?
Yeah, so we asked pretty much the same question for cooling and heating. In fact, it was a separate question if you used central AC, and then another question, similar question if you used window wall, and then also a separate question for heating. So that data is available. We just featured the air conditioning question in our talk today.
Great. Sorry, they're coming in quite quickly. Will future RECS, will future RECS take into consideration renewable technologies?
Yeah, so we actually already include some, I guess, renewable technologies. In fact, a couple of questions I had is, over time is how you treat homes with solar PV. So we certainly capture that as a characteristic within the questionnaire. And then we can do some light editing. You know, for example, if someone says they have solar, wind, and combined heat and power, we might check that out. And as far as the consumption, I know we haven't released consumption data yet, but as far as the consumption goes, our plan now that we generally have a pretty, I wouldn't say representative, but getting close to representative sample for solar homes. The consumption data will reflect the actual consumption in the home. So this will be including the solar PV generation. So we've kind of, because our goal is to produce site consumption estimates and not site minus solar generation, not just the grid consumption. And we do have questions about an electric vehicle. And in fact, we are planning to incorporate electric vehicles in our in-use models for the first time. I don't think that was accounted for in the past. And another thing I'll mention too is some of these sort of interesting kind of subpopulation topics are topics maybe that we couldn't cover in depth using an in-person survey. Small sample, the longer you're at the house, the more money it costs. But the marginal cost of, say, having a special module in the questionnaire is more likely when you can use webmail. And using webmail, you can dig into topics at a much deeper level than you could with in-person surveys. So hopefully I've answered. And the only other renewable I can think of is just sort of renewable is capturing geothermal heat pumps, which we do.
Someone's asked for our contact information, so I'm going to go ahead and throw this up, but keep the questions coming in the chat box.
Okay.
But here is our EIA website. This is the homepage for the RECS. Information for Chip, for Danny, and for me. We have a question about how are responses validated? Do we know that respondents are accurate? Do they guess? How do we address this? Is there any in-person validation of web and mail responses?
Sure. So with the in-person surveys, you have people on the ground that have been trained to make sure they're at the right house, and they have sort of some screening questions that they ask to make sure they're at the sampled address. So there's that validation that goes on. We also ask the respondent to validate the address. Make sure they're not answering for another house. So that happens in person. You don't have quite as much of that kind of validation with web and mail, so there's possible there could be some I guess, sampling error there, where you've received responses for a different house. And that's one thing that we don't think that's significant enough to invalidate our estimates, but something that we'll continue to look into. And when households get the questionnaire or a link to the questionnaire, it's via a letter. So we actually don't send them, we don't have a list of emails or anything. We don't send them emails. We send them an actual letter, and they go to a website or answer the paper questionnaire. And it's pretty clear on that invitation to respond that we want responses just for this address. As far as the responses themselves, what we've actually learned recently is that we can get a lot. We can do a lot of validation by looking at utility bills. Now, the second phase of RECS, this is the household survey that we've been talking about. The second phase is where we actually go to energy suppliers, utilities, and the like, and get the actual energy bills for the households that respond. That's a pretty high-quality, rich source of information. And over the last couple of months, we've been comparing the characteristics answers with the consumption trends from the billing data. And give it a simple example where you have a household respondent who says they use electricity for space heating and water heating is natural gas. You can clearly see from the electricity and natural gas bills that they actually use natural gas for space heating. So we've been correcting the characteristics data. And I will point out that the data that you see up on the website now is preliminary, and there will be a final set of tables and a final microdata file coming out at a later date.
Okay, we have a question about just to confirm what I heard, there was a bias found between responding households and household income and education level. Is that the correct interpretation of what you talked about, Danny? Can you elaborate on that?
Okay. So, no, that's not quite what I said. What I meant was that between the respondents to the different modes, we sometimes saw some demographic differences. So people who might choose to respond by web are people who have internet access at home, and so those are people who might have a little bit higher income and education. But we still had plenty of people across all education levels and income levels that responded to all of the modes. And our weights also account for some geographic factors to make sure, or demographic factors to make sure that our estimates reflect the entire population.
Thank you.
I'll add something to that too. So, I mentioned setting aside resources to pilot these web and mail modes, which contributed to a smaller sample size this go around. Because one of our concerns was that you would only get a certain demographic responding via the web or responding to paper or self-administered questionnaire, and that your respondents wouldn't be very representative. But we started finding out pretty early on that we got responses via web and paper from a variety of demographics and a variety of household energy characteristics. We even had people, we haven't had people without internet access responding via the web. You ask how might they do this? Well, they can go to the library or they can respond on their phone. So pretty interesting.
Can you elaborate at all on what demographic variables are used for the weighting?
Danny, are in the technical documentation, do we list the weighting variables?
I don't think we do.
Okay. So if you ask that question, feel free to I don't have those variables off the top of my head. It's we do something called there are a couple of different weighting adjustments. There's a non-response adjustment, and there's what's called post-stratification. So the RECS represents 118.2 million occupied primary residences, and if you look at the ACS for 2015, that's the same number that ACS reports. So we do benchmark to the ACS number. So typical things like housing type is a variable that's going to be in there. Year of construction. But I can say the weighting adjustments are not that great. It's not not huge adjustments that we make.
We have a question about when will square footage data be available. Soon, so soon. We have the tables made. They're going through our internal review processes and getting loaded up on the web. So I would say October.
Yeah, probably so.
Keep an eye out. If you're on our listserv, we'll send a message around. If you're not on our listserv, you can sign up on our website.
And if you're familiar with the RECS questionnaire, you'll also notice that over the years we've had a series of questions about what's loosely called household energy insecurity. So these are questions about households having problems paying bills, getting disconnection notices, their home being too hot or too cold, or can't pay for broken equipment, things like that. Those questions have always been included on the RECS in collaboration with HHS and in support of the Low-Income Home Energy Assistance Program. For the first time, we're actually going to produce a table with those data, those characteristics data about challenges that people have with regard to energy in their homes. So be looking for that over the next couple weeks, too.
Here's a quick one. Was Alaska included? Were there any pumas in Alaska?
So technically, we can't tell you, because we're not releasing state estimates, we cannot tell you which states were included in the RECS. Okay, so we draw a sample so that we hit a target for the Pacific Division, and that's the lowest level we go. So however the sample falls out to get an estimates for the Pacific Division is however it falls out. So can't tell you that directly. That's a bit of a disclosure issue, but I think in a sample of 12,000, you can assume that most, if not all, states are covered.
I was told, this is a question, I was told that a submetering study is underway. Can you briefly describe the submetering study? How is this data being used in the RECS program?
Okay. So yes, a submetering study is underway. We don't have any contractors or official partners in place right now. I'd say we're still sort of the end stages of like a exploratory exercise. Several months ago, we put out what's called a request for information, which allowed us to receive input from a number of different players in this field, manufacturers, labs, to learn more about submetering and what's been done, what's out there. And in this respect, submetering we're not talking about like submetering an apartment in a multifamily building. We're talking about devices that are going to capture or estimate individual end uses in a home. So this could be like circuit level or sort of loosely termed like whole home disaggregation. So if you're familiar with SMAPIs or the Sense products, Nereo, those types of products. So again, I sort of characterize it as at the end of the exploratory phase, and I think we're hoping within the next year or so that we'll be collecting some data from some households.
Danny, here's one for you. This was touched on, but do we know how many or what percentage of web responders responded on a mobile device versus on a computer?
Yes. So of our web responders, about 80% were on a desktop or laptop computer, and about the remaining 20% were on a tablet or a smartphone.
Great. We had a question about, is there a list of the new questions that were added in the 2015 RECS? Do we have a list available of all the new ones?
Danny, that's in the questionnaire spec, isn't it?
Yeah, you could go through and identify which ones were marked as new, but there's not just a document of the new ones.
And a reminder, you can find the questionnaire spec on the microdata page by looking at survey forms, or we actually have it parked here on our right rail, survey forms. And here you can see the full spec is this CAPI one, and then you can see the paper version, a PDF of the paper version that was mailed out if you're interested. We have a question about how do changes in the questions affect historical comparisons?
That's a great question, because another initiative that we're looking now is what we call a historical data project. And this is because sort of each each RECS is almost like its own project. There are lots of similarities from one RECS to the next, but it is a cross-sectional study. So there are changes to design and the questionnaire. And we admit that we could do better at linking historical data, one series from another. So, if you're interested in providing input in that, we're about to start on some outreach and getting some input on how better to serve people doing historical analysis.
All right. We probably have time for maybe one more question. I'm going to pick.
This one about AEO. The first question. Yeah, one about the AEO.
Totally don't see it. It was, can you please describe the key differences between the data in the RECS and in the annual energy outlook?
Oh, good. I'm glad somebody asked that question, because I always say that our very first data user are the people who sit across the hall from us who run the who run the NIMS model, run the residential portion of the NIMS model. So RECS is a key input into the residential model, and RECS and CVECs are key inputs. They're more or less like benchmarks. So whatever the last RECS was would be the benchmark sort of starting point of consumption estimates for the AEO. A key difference is that AEO covers the whole residential sector, so there's an adjustment for that. And RECS only covers about 90% of the residential sector. And then AEO also, they use lots of other supplemental data to update their projections.
Thanks so much. That is pretty much all the time we have for today. Please feel free to reach out to us with other inquiries or comments. If we missed your question today, please let us know and write us an email and we'll get back to you. Like I said earlier, we're going to have a recording of today's webinar available on our website, so check back for that in a couple days if you missed anything or if you'd like to refer it to a colleague. When you close out of the event today, a survey in SurveyMonkey should be open in your browser. So please do weigh in, let us know how we did, let us know what topics you would like to see in future webinars and what you'd like to learn about the RECS. And with that, we're going to conclude the webinar. This is our contact info, and we look forward to hearing from you soon and hosting more webinars soon. Thanks so much.